Hello everyone, my name is Aidana Shakirbaeva and today we are going to talk about US foreign policy towards Central Asian countries. And after a Cold War era, the international system has become unipolar with the United States containing the capability to establish world order in the international system and possessed all the qualities that are needed to a dominant power in terms of military power, and America also had a very strong ideology, and America has improved its technology. Uh, Also, it had enormous economy, and cultural influence too to other states. And when USSR collapsed in 1991, Central Asian countries all became very independent. They gained the independence from the USSR, and the American specialists predicted that the United States involvement in this region would be relatively modest. It's considered to be very weak, and Central Asian countries were not the most foremost priority for Americans' interest. And those specialists advised that the United States must be restrained in its relation with Central Asian countries. However, the growing conflict between the North and the South, a phenomenon which might finally take the form of a conflict between the Western countries and the Muslim world, this situation had changed America's position towards Central Asian countries. And mostly scholars are divided in two groups when it comes to America's relationship and America's interest and priority to Central Asian countries. The first group um, state that Central Asia did not occupy a priority place in the interest of major powers, not only America but also European Union, Russia, China, and the others. They argued that the United States and the other Western countries were mainly interested in political stability of the region and the cooperation with Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan because those countries are very rich for natural resources and the gases. The prior uh, to events of September 11th, Paris Rumor wrote that initially the United States adopted a wait and see policy towards Central Asian states. And since then, the United States was involved in a number of other global problems, especially in the Middle East, and the region as a priority in terms of America's fundamental interests. The region of Central Asia was not considered to be um, the the most important issue and the priority. And the second scholar that shared the same opinion as Boris Surma was Rustam Bornashev. Um, he expressed an interesting opinion on the US policies in Central Asia. He says that the US was interested in exploiting Central Asia's natural resources and preventing any single power from dominating the region. And any other power, we mean China and Russia specifically. Um, and they also tried to control issues related to nuclear weapons, and it had developed much effort into drawing the Central Asian states into the Western military sphere. In the long term, it wouldn't be willing to make great sacrifices to defend these states or to guarantee their security. On the other hand, there are other scholars too who say that America is highly interested in cooperation with Central Asian states. The first scholar is Mikhail Konarovsky. Mm, He wrote that America became attracted to Central Asia's unique geographical location, as well as vast energy and human resources. And he also states that the United States didn't want to lose in the global competition to other countries, because, as you know, there were other states emerging as superpowers like Russia, China, and also maybe India. Eric Hoagland is another scholar. He stated that the United States was very much afraid of the spread of Islamic fundamentalism, and its possible influence in Central Asian countries by Iran, or more recently Afghanistan, and the West had to undertake some measures to contain this regional threat. And we also have Nancy Lubin, and she wrote that such issues like drug trafficking and organized crime, terrorism, control of nuclear weapons, environmental devastation, and the regional instability would directly affect American security interests. And after Central Asian countries gained their independence, America started to be concerned about the situation that these newly independent states might become involved in a regional arms race, given that Kazakhstan can possibly create a mount of nuclear arsenal and also strategically important resources such as uranium. And others. And there was also a fear of nuclear instability that could emerge if Iran or states like Pakistan would gain access to the Central Asian uranium mines. Even today, America is highly interested in containing of not spreading and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and it's highly interested in containing, restricting Kazakhstan or any other states from developing their own nuclear weapon. Even though Kazakhstan deliberately gave up its nuclear arsenal to Western countries, America is still concerned about the possible mm, building of nuclear weapons by other states that are not part of non-proliferation treaty by United Nations. And in February 1992, James Baker, during his visit to Central Asia, he declared that the United States intends to save the region from the threat of Islamic fundamentalism. And this man, Süleyman Demirel, during his visit to the United States in February 1992, they discussed about the situation of Islamic extremism, and the main topics were coordination of Washington and Ankara policies towards the southern belt of former Soviet Union. And this issue was included in the priorities of the country's strategic partnership. The United States believed that Ankara would help America to expand into Russia's soft belly and strengthen its position there. Turkey's role was to prevent restoration of socialism because, as you know, USSR was a communistic state, and the former Soviet Union states, Central Asian states, the 5 of them that gained independence, Turkey and Western democratic states were concerned, were threatened that those states, without experience on how to formulate the structure and the political and economic structure of a new state, they were concerned that these states will base their ideology, their political structure on socialism. And Turkey's role was to block Russia's influence if it were to act unfriendly towards the United States, and Turkey mostly was seen as a tool in the hands of America, and it would act as a prevention of the Muslim states of the former Soviet Union. And in its turn, Ankara received political, financial, economic, and moral support of the United States to carry out those policies. In the same year, the United States and Israel started a joint program in Central Asia. Under this program, the United States provided $5 million in aid to the Central Asian states, and plus Azerbaijan and Armenia, for medical mostly and agricultural purposes. In its turn, Israel provided technical expertise and support for the distribution and the use of aid. Washington believed that extensive Israeli involvement in the region's economies would help to establish Western rather than Islamic orientation for the political systems of the states, because as you all know for sure, that America is highly afraid of the spread of Islamic extremism into other states, except apart from Middle East. And basically, America didn't have any vital priorities or interests in Central Asian states until the event of 2001, on the 11th of September. When it happened, it became clear that there was a security vacuum in the region that posed a serious threat to United States national interests, and it had to be addressed directly by Americans themselves. And the security issues have thus taken priority in the United States policy approaches toward this region in between 2001 and 2002. September 11th, actually, radically changed the situation in Central Asia and led to an increased military involvement in all Central Asian states. Well, with an exception of Turkmenistan, because Turkmenistan during the time kept neutrality since 1992 and it remained unaffected. And there is a possibility that the United States feared the domino effect in Central Asia, under which the existing fragile regimes in the region would collapse in the case of, well, of course, in the case of Taliban's total victory. And this could lead to even stronger authoritarian and radical leadership tendencies among Central Asian states. And it might create chaos due to the proximity of the Afghan conflict. And there was also fear that Afghan conflict would spill over into Central Asian region. And furthermore, the domino effect would provide China, Iran, and Russia with an opportunity to take responsibility for restoring order in this region. And it could undermine the influence of United States and its position as a superpower. Well, after the event of 9/11, it provided the United States policy with a firm belief, which previously had been missing. The Bush administration declared Central Asia's new geopolitical significance. Uzbekistan and Tajikistan were announced as frontline states because they states directly, if you can see in the map, borders with Afghanistan, which imposed a big and still impose a big threat to Central Asian countries, which is, as we know, the expansion of Islamic extremism. The United States didn't just secure the staging facilities in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, but America also promised to ensure security in Central Asia from this time on. And America established, after the events of 9/11, of course, two military bases, one in Kyrgyzstan, which is called Manas base, and the one is Karshi-Khanabad base, which is located in Uzbekistan. And those bases carry out supply, and they also support functions for the Afghan campaign. Then next, the main policy of United States is economic factor. As you know, when 5 Central Asian states gained their independence, they had an enormous economic needs and also deteriorating infrastructure, and those factors required international attention because those countries suffer from poverty, from also unemployment, as you know, because those states were combined under USSR. And when they got in their independence, the leaders of these countries had no experience and no skills on how to form a fully functional government that would lead to peace and prosperity. And all of the Central Asian states have to contend with significant unemployment and poverty, as I told before. That's why the International Monetary Fund actively worked on the basic economic reform package, mostly with Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and has recently started staff monitor programs in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan too. And as you know, monetary fund is more American centric and the American leaded because most of the percent of voting and the influence is located in the hands of Americans. Now, Kyrgyzstan is also working with the World Bank on the poverty reduction program. And there has been some progress in economic development, but not so much. It's, we could say, uneven, and more economic transformation is clearly in need in these regions. And the United States will continue to push for reform with regional governments. In 1994, the United States established the Central Asian American Enterprise Fund, and it provided loans, technical expertise in order to promote private sector growth in Central Asian countries. And by the mid-90s, the United States became the main investor in Central Asia. And it actually meant that American companies took control over the most promising enterprises, as well as a large part of the budget revenues. Well, it mostly is in the case of Kazakhstan. And because of this, Kyrgyzstan became completely dependent on the International Monetary Fund. And now this state is unable to develop independently, which is considered to be one of the disadvantages of relying to superpower completely, mostly in terms of finance. Now, when it comes to the energy interest of America in Central Asia, which was actually a major and the main focus of economic development initiatives when those 5 countries took their independence, and since the multiple pipeline policy was established, and there has been progress with the Caspian Pipeline Consortium and also Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan pipelines. And then now Kazakhstan, our country, can sell its energy on world markets for higher prices than before. But there is still room for more development in the Central Asian energy sector, including the development of Turkmenistan's gas resources. But of course, there are some obstacles too, because as you know, Caspian Sea is very full and rich of natural resources, especially oil. But as you know, pumping oil under the water demands much more skilled professionals and techniques, and also much more money. That's why Caspian Sea is not considered to be very important to a Western, especially to America. But still, it brings some profit to America, and that they have interest in this country. But this is not considered to be first and foremost priority like any other Middle Eastern countries. Also, Central Asian region is a landlocked region, and that's why it is very hard to transfer the oil to other states, and it's very hard for these countries of Central Asia to get an access to water transportation and the water ports. The next concern of American regarding the Central Asian countries is geopolitical issues or geopolitical interests. As you know, USA could not ignore the increasing competition between China and Russia for dominance in Central Asian region. And while it was clear that Russia didn't have necessary economic and military capabilities to establish itself as a superpower again, like USSR, but it was not in the case of China. For this reason, the United States either had to dominate the region or accept the possibility that China is going to dominate this region. And Ambassador Stephen Sestanovich, special advisor to the uh, Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State on the former Soviet republics, in his address to the members of the Congress, he said that cornerstone of American policy in Central Asia is securing the sovereignty, independence, and the territorial integrity of the states. And in order to advance these objectives, the United States diplomacy focused on four main issues. The first is the formation of democratic political institutions, as they are the long-term guarantors of stability and prosperity. And as we know, the American governmental structure is based on liberalism and democratic views. And when new states gain their independence, their sovereignty, America, almost the Western states, they put forward their two main conditions. The first is to accept democracy. The second is to establish and to accept free market. These are the conditions for a state to be in peace and to prosperity, and to be open for negotiations with all the countries, and also respecting the human rights. The second point is promotion of market economic reform. This is considered to be the second, as we told before, condition for becoming an independent and to become recognized by superpowers. Third point is cooperation and greater integration of these countries into the Euro-Atlantic and the international communities. Fourth point here is the advancement of responsible security policies, including weapons non-proliferation, anti-terrorism, and drug trafficking. I think the fourth point is very clear. What I was going to talk about next is a US new strategy, because as you know, recently China has introduced its new program strategy initiative regarding Central Asia, not only Central Asia, but Eastern Asia and the European Union too. And China states that it is going to allocate $60 billion to Central Asian countries to develop their infrastructure. And this initiative, this strategy is going to give a big opportunity for Chinese officials, for Chinese government in terms of political power and of course economy too, because this initiative is going to connect Asia with European countries. And the Central Asia, of course, in this initiative plays an important role for Chinese government. And if this initiative successfully gets implemented, America is probably going to slowly lose its position as a superpower and the dominant actor in the world, in the international system. That's why the United States introduced its new strategy, which is called C5+1, which means Central Asian 5 countries and also Afghanistan. The main issue of this is to integrate Afghanistan with Central Asian countries, as they say, in order to prevent the expansion of extremism. And they also state that Central Asian countries are going to be helpful in containing and fighting against the terrorism. And the third, of course, is energy issues. And so in this strategy, there are a total of 6 points. The first point is support and strengthen the sovereignty and the independence of the Central Asian states, individually and as a region. Just as Russia finds it easier to engage with the European Union as a whole as opposed to its individual members one by one, So too does the European United States aspire to do the same with Central Asia, with a notable exception being that its intentions are to improve their collective capability for balancing between Russia and China. The second point is reduce terrorist threats in Central Asia. um, the United States no longer wants to subversively destroy the region in order to turn it into a black hole of chaos for entrapping the surrounding states, but seeks to safeguard it from such threats because the new strategic thinking is that America has more to gain by taking advantage of a geostrategically central balancing core of countries of C5, Central Asian 5, and the Eurasian heartland under the international conditions that emerged after the failure of its divide and the rule strategy. The third aim is to expand and maintain support for stability in Afghanistan. In connection with the above, the United States hopes to rely on the C5 countries as its lead from behind partners for ensuring Afghanistan's stability following its inevitable peace. So it ideally envisages this being executed in mostly economic ways, corresponding with the Trump's administration general focus on these models operandi for achieving foreign policy results, which will be described more in policy objectives in 4 and 6 points. Now the fourth point is to encourage connectivity between Central Asia and Afghanistan. Well, the United States believes that enhanced connectivity between the C5 and Afghanistan will strengthen their collective balancing capabilities, but it also encourages them to explore trans-regional integration projects and the power projects to Pakistan and the multimodal Lapis Lazuli corridor to the European Union. The fifth goal is to promote rule of law reform and respect for human rights. This policy objective is double-edged sword, actually. It's viewed from a positive angle. The United States is promoting stability by encouraging the C5 countries to comply with their people's growing democratic demands by gradually engaging in controlled system renewal through free, fair, and inclusive elections, so as to create less of a legitimate incentive for anti-government insurgency. And on the other hand, from a negative side of things, this could also be exploited as an instrument of pressure to legitimize color revolution attempts to coercive geostrategic purposes pursuant to the previously mentioned insurance policy of relying upon the black hole scenario if worse comes worst. The last 6 point is to promote United States investment in and the development of Central Asia. Unlike the big businesses that typically represent Russian and Chinese economic interests in Central Asia and are often criticized, maybe it's right or wrong, but for mostly only benefiting the elites, the superpowers, as we say. And the American investments in the region seeks to serve as a catalyst for improving the livelihoods of the greatest number of grassroots stakeholders as possible by creating opportunities for workers and small and medium enterprises, which could be tremendously advanced in the event that the United States invests in the proposed corridor for connecting Central Asia with the Pakistan through Afghanistan. And it would be easy to get access to the rest of the global market. And at the same time, China is becoming increasingly interested in Central Asia, as I told before. And it introduced its new Silk Road Economic Belt Initiative, and which is another name for One Belt One Road Initiative. And it's giving its active investments in the countries of the region. And since 2015, two Central Asian states, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, have been members of Eurasian Economic Union, and thus they are demonstrating their desire to develop closer cooperation with Russia and Belarus. It seems clear that the United States is likely to remain outside this process going on in the region. And also, the United States doesn't have direct economic interests in Central Asia. Being an outsider clearly contradicts the US pursuit to diversify the relations between the states of the region and the outside world, and to keep Russia and China from obtaining a greater role of influence in the region, because these actions could mean that America is losing its position as a dominant power in international relations. And the creation of C5+1 format will apparently show the 5 states that it's not just Russia and China who might help to resolve regional issues in Central Asia, but the US also can be a help to those states who at this point is not seeking to serve any specific interest except regional development enhancement. At the same time, the administration of Trump is quite serious about countering terrorism and remains active in this direction. Afghanistan, also not only Afghanistan, also Syria and Iraq. And according to some scholars, this is perhaps the main convergence of the interest of the USA and the Central Asian states. And I would like to show you a video of Ambassador Ellis Walls, who is being interviewed about the strategy of US foreign policy towards Central Asian countries. And this ambassador is going to talk about America's strategy, the role of Russia and China and its influence in the region, and the possible solutions and possible outcomes of this strategy.
Of people in real terms.
Right. I think that it is a good thing that America does not have a boundary, a land boundary with Uzbekistan. We don't have a stake in your territory. We're not seeking to cast our influence over you. Instead, I mean, America has always stood for the principles of Uzbekistan and the countries of the former Soviet Union to be free, to be sovereign, to have their territory respected, the integrity of its territory respected. And that is useful to Uzbekistan as it navigates its relations. We do not see a relationship with the United States coming at the expense of any other relationship that Uzbekistan enjoys. Uzbekistan, as a landlocked country, has to have a multi-vector foreign policy, has to build relations with its neighbors and take advantage of opportunities that that emerge. And we understand that. I think, because we're not located in the region, we're a rather benign force when it comes to partnering for reform and economic development. But to say that we're not engaged in the region, I think is a complete mischaracterization. We are engaged in the longest running war that America has participated in. We have lost lives and material losses, next door in Afghanistan. The region has been a preoccupation, of the last 4 or 5 presidents. And so very much Central Asia features. And so you've seen not just the phone call between your president and President Trump, but the recent visit of President Nazarbayev, the high-level engagements by Secretary Tillerson. Central Asia matters as a region and as an important country in Central Asia. Uzbekistan will be critical to any regional effort at increasing stability and prosperity.
This has been an unconventional administration in many ways. Should we expect any unconventional approaches to the region? in the near future?
I think, but there's much about our interests in Central Asia that are conventional. You know, again, our interest in a stable and secure Central Asia that's growing and prospering. And so those long time honored security interests of the United States are going to remain constant. We are always looking for new ways to engage. And I think we live in a new world today, social media, with both the good and the bad. I mean, the ability to connect people to people in ways that we could not have imagined before, but also the dark side of that connection, the ability of evil groups to recruit, through internet, and the rise of, violent extremism and nihilist organizations that have attracted young people from around the world, including Central Asia. So we have to deal with everything that's being thrown at us by our changing times, and that's another very important area for cooperation between our countries.
Speaking of that, we see the relationship sour with Pakistan. And when there's conversation about this in Washington, Central Asia comes up as the best alternative in terms of supply routes. And we know that the Northern Distribution Network never fully stopped functioning. Should we expect any new deals or maybe agreements or initiatives in the near future?
I think we're always looking to maintain our trade relations and our transport relations with countries of the region. But I would say when it comes to Pakistan, we see Pakistan as a very important part of the solution to stability in Afghanistan. And the goal of the South Asia strategy is to work with Pakistan to see that its interests are reflected and met at a negotiating table at the same time that we're able to push or entice or facilitate the Taliban's own participation in a negotiation. So I wouldn't read, our current relationship with Pakistan as suggesting that we want to walk away from that relationship. To the contrary, we very much want to have a partnership with Pakistan against all violent extremist organizations. I think Central Asia and the Central Asian leaders and the Uzbek leadership have always opposed violent extremism. They've been very concerned about the prospect or the possibility of terrorist organizations taking root. There are obvious areas, overlapping interests that we have in sharing information and better understanding the phenomenon. Because as we defeat, for instance, ISIS in Iraq and Syria, none of us can afford for the remnants of those organizations to take root elsewhere. We have to be on guard. We have to have the information sharing arrangements in place and the law enforcement relationships in place to be able to counter it. But more than that, we have to understand the phenomenon and I think come to a better understanding of why young people in particular have been attracted to these violent nihilistic creeds. And so this is something that we share and that the global community shares. And under our own C5 programs in the region, counterterrorism and countering violent extremism is an important pillar.
Speaking of U.S. interests and the mutual interests, obviously, we saw how the relationship with Kyrgyzstan suffered under the Russian influence. And I know you're a Russia expert. You've spent a lot of time focusing on Russia. What kind of tools or mechanisms, levers do you have to protect your interests in the region?
I think our relationship with the Kyrgyz Republic, the United States has always stood for the Kyrgyz Republic's, independence and territorial integrity, and has, invested, significantly in trying to assist the Kyrgyz government increase its own capacity, to work with civil society and media, to increase those institutions that are, the guarantors of democracy. I think we all recognize that the Kyrgyz Republic has managed democratic transitions. It's made important progress in its own political evolution. And certainly we desire a productive and constructive relationship with the Kyrgyz Republic. At one point, we had the Manas Air Base, which was an important contribution to the Northern Distribution Network. But even without the air base, I think we see the Kyrgyz Republic's contribution to the region as being being essential. I mean, when we talk about, again, energy sharing and energy cooperation, it's all 5 countries of the region working together that are going to maximize the potential of any one individual country. And I know Uzbekistan sort of feels this intimately with the situation of the enclaves and the borders. You can't even as you build your own institutions, your relations with your neighbors are important. And so we would like to help facilitate those relations. And again, I think what we bring most to the table is the fact that we aren't living in your neighborhood.
So U.S. will continue to be a unique player as far as, as far as Washington is concerned.
So, having watched the video and having listened to this lecture about American foreign policy towards Central Asian countries, I would like you to ask yourselves these 3 questions and give proper answers and expressing your honest opinions on this issue. The first question would be about the first and foremost concern, or let's say interest of the United States in Central Asian region. Is it security? Is it the geopolitical and the political reasons, or is it economic interest that overlaps the other reasons? And the second question would be about the key actors in this region, whose influence is more desirable for Central Asian countries. Is it the United States, Russia, or China? And the last question would be about the strategy that was introduced by America recently, C5+1 strategy, and what are the prospects or the threats of this strategy to Central Asian countries, and is this strategy achievable for Central Asia and for America and the other states that are engaged in this strategy, or is it going to be a failure? I would like you to think about these questions and give proper answers to those questions.